It is no secret that the United Kingdom's colonial history has been murky. An empire which was touted to never have the sun set on its lands is now a mere shadow of what it once was. But the world has not forgotten the crimes of the British Crown as well as the loot over the past few centuries. The man you see on the screen is Thomas Bruce, who was the 7th Earl of Elgin. Yes, this is the very same person after whom the Parthenon sculptures are popularly called the Elgin marbles today. He was appointed as the British ambassador to the Ottoman Empire in November 1798. Before his departure to take up this post, he approached officials of the British government. He inquired whether they would be interested in employing artists to take casts and drawings of sculptured portions of the Parthenon. And according to Elgin, the answer of the British government was entirely negative. Hence, Elgin's original intention was to only document the sculptures. However, in 1801, Elgin began moving materials from the Parthenon and its surrounding structures. Pieces were also removed from the temple of Athena. They were brought from Greece to Malta, then a British protectorate, where they remained for a number of years, and later they were transported to Britain. The removal was completed in 1812 at a personal cost to Elgin of £74,240. Elgin intended to use the marbles for a private museum to enhance the art of the nation. However, Elgin encountered a costly divorce suit, forcing him to sell the marble to settle his debts. Elgin inevitably sold the marbles to the British government for £35,000. In February 1816, a House of Commons Select Committee held public hearings on whether Elgin had acquired the marbles legally and whether they should be purchased by the government. Elgin stated that the work of his agents at the Acropolis and the removal of the marbles were authorized by a Farman, which is an official edict from the Sultan obtained in July 1801. The committee cleared Elgin of all allegations that he had acquired the marbles illegally or had misused his powers as ambassador. Elgin's version of the events, however, remains controversial. No official record of July 1801 Farman has been found in the Turkish archives. The 7th Earl of Elgin took more than half of what now remains of the surviving sculptural decoration of the Parthenon. After the marbles were passed into trusteeship of the British Museum in 1817, they have been held there since then. This has been a source of contention between Greece and United Kingdom for decades now. In fact, even today, ties between the UK and Greece are marred by this. Greece's Prime Minister Kyriakos Mitsotakis was slated to meet UK Prime Minister Rishi Sunak. Prior to this meeting, Mitsotakis stated that he would push for the return of the Parthenon marbles and highlighted that sculptures would look better in the Acropolis Museum. However, after his statements, Sunak cancelled the scheduled meeting and for no reason, the cancellation was publicly communicated. Meanwhile, Greece has expressed displeasure on the cancelled meeting now. This brings us to the following questions. How long will the British continue to evade answering for the crimes committed and items looted during colonial rule? Is it time the British return the Parthenon marbles to Greece? Is it time to form a global alliance and demand the return of stolen treasures? Is the big question we're asking today. Joining us on the panel is Ambassador Bhaswati Mukherjee, former diplomat. Vasant Shinde, historian, also joins us on the show. Last but not the least, Professor Madhav Nalapat, editorial director of the Sunday Guardian, is also with us on the broadcast. Professor Nalapat, I'll begin with you, sir. Thank you for joining us, and I hope you can hear me, sir.
Of course.
Sir, it's a perennial question that one that India has also been asking. That these loots that happened when the British were in charge of a number of places around the world haven't still come to some sort of a closure or a conclusion for a number of parties, which included India, and now it is Greece. A number of people have asked for reparations for what the British did, but it doesn't seem to be coming through. This new chapter between the Greeks and the British, how do you think it also sort of brushes out, the wounds of what India has been trying to heal for, 3/4 of a century?
Well, the fact is, Vineet, that it's very unlikely that the Greeks are going to get the Parthenon statues back. And may I say, it was an act of sacrilege, actually. It was a temple, an ancient temple. And it was an act of sacrilege what was committed there. And removing half, possibly he could not remove more than half. And that's why he removed only half. But the reality is, it was, as you correctly said, it was a naked loot of a priceless artistic treasure, which is the Parthenon, and a treasure which goes back into ancient history, and where, frankly, a lot of European history comes from. So there's no question that it was completely an unjust thing to do. Having said that, the fact of the matter is the British museum and British noble homes and so many other properties are dotted with this kind of, if I may say so, loot that have been collected over the generations, over the centuries by the British as they basically took control of their empire. So Rishi Sunak will be worried that if he were to meet the Greek Prime Minister, now that the Greek Prime Minister has publicly said that the return of the marbles is the number one priority for him, well, the fact is that tomorrow you may have a visitor from India asking for some of the loot from India, including some very priceless treasures to be returned. The treasures that are on display in various British homes and in the British Museum. So there's absolutely no question of those Parthenon treasures ever coming back, just as there's very little question of any of these treasures ever coming back, because the loot was so huge and so completely substantial that it's impossible to even conceive of them going back. Britain will be denuded of much of its, if I may say so, acquired. I don't want to use the word stolen, but that's what it was. Treasure. But, and there's no question about that at all. And if I may point out, Vineet, this is for India. We need to study how much loot took place in India. For example, temples. Even after 1947, you have several ancient temples being ransacked and the treasures there being looted, sacrilege being committed. So this kind of thing, and then suddenly, turning up in some auction in London or maybe in the US or some other location. So this kind of thing has been happening. Unfortunately, it's part of the colonial legacy. And as far as the Greek Prime Minister is concerned, I think he should have basically, held back his fire until he met Rishi Sunak and talked to him. Having once declared that he's come for this purpose, it is, self-evident that the Prime Minister of the UK would not want to meet him to protect his own political future.
Ambassador Mukherjee, what's your assessment of this entire situation? It's rather diplomatically unfair and rude, to back out of a meeting because, a new pointer came up. In fact, anybody who leads the United Kingdom should very much be aware and embrace the fact that, these are questions which will pop up from time to time because, like they said, the sun never set in the British Empire.
Well, I'm a little surprised, frankly, Vineet, with the Rishi Sunak's reaction. I'm very familiar with this topic because when I was ambassador to UNESCO for 6 years, there is a UNESCO convention to which both Greece and United Kingdom are state parties, which is called Return of Cultural Property to their place of origin, which is a polite way of saying return of looted and stolen property to their place of origin. The convention, of course, hides behind the fact that it talks about return of property from the date in which the convention came into effect. In other words, it does not affect colonial time. However, the Parthenon marbles, the Elgin marbles, are very much on the agenda, and I have been in stormy meetings between the Greek ambassador and the British ambassador at that time with regard to the return of these marbles, because the point here is that just as for instance, the Durand line was drawn up on the basis of some fictitious signature by the then ruler of Afghanistan, the fact that, for instance, the Maharaja Ranjit Singh's Kalgi was taken away from him on the basis of consent taken from him when he was a minor. So all these properties which have been acquired in a so-called legal manner by the British Parliament are completely illegal, and they are not in consonance with today's society, today's world, or Britain's place in the world. At some point, I feel that the United Kingdom will be forced to return these marbles, because Greece has a different position from India. It is part of NATO, it's part of the European Union, and there is huge pressure that Greece has brought on the return of these marbles. So at some point, I think the Brits will have to return them. Now it comes to, will they do the same for us? That would depend entirely on how much pressure we bring on them. But I can tell you, Vineet, from my personal experience, that when I was Joint Secretary Europe West and we found some priceless pieces in the Victoria and Albert Museum, and we informed the Brits, the very next day they disappeared. And they are still, I'm told, in the basement of the V&A, because the Brits will then neither use them, nor show them, nor return them. And the argument that the director of the British Museum has consistently given to the government of India is that we will share with you a virtual version of your heritage, because your heritage is safer in UK than it is in India. In other words, the Brits still consider us to be some kind of colonial state which cannot look after its own heritage and treasures. And this information that I'm giving on national television through you, Vineet, should be widely disseminated, because it is unacceptable in today's day and age, when our GDP has passed UK a long time back, that we are being told that our priceless treasures looted in colonial times, right from the Battle of Plassey onwards, ever since Siraj was defeated, till they left the empire, our treasures were stolen, and they have never been returned. Sometimes they are embarrassed, as the Queen was to wear it on her crown, what was stolen from the peacock throne. Sometimes they are embarrassed, but they will never give away. So I would say, in contrast to what Professor Nalapat has said, that maybe one day they may be pressured to return the Elgin marble, at least some of it, but never ever will they return a single treasure to India, unless we bring so much pressure upon them on things that matter, that this nation of shopkeepers can do a deal with us. We will have to do a deal with them to get back our treasure.
Absolutely right, ma'am. Mr. Shinde, if you're there with us, sir.
Yeah, please.
So if you compare what the British have, that's Indian, vis-a-vis what they have, which is Greek, how would you categorize this difference, and how vociferously, how staunchly should India be asking back for what the British owe us? I've been to those museums. I've seen the amount of gold. I've seen the amount of memorabilia that has been taken away from us, and it continues to still bring money and riches to United Kingdom.
So thank you, Vineet, for inviting me here, and also for bringing up this important matter. See, what you see, in fact, in British Museum is a tip of iceberg. I have worked in British Museum for maybe a couple of years, and I've seen the entire collection in their repository, and it is a huge, in fact, and the amount of loot these Britishers have done during the colonial period is incredible. So I think what is important here, that when they ruled the major part of the world, they had systematic this strategy, in fact, to loot and to take away the precious or the classical objects, sculptures, coins, etc. And they have taken them systematically. And we have a lot of objects in the British Museum from India, from Egypt, from Greece, and even there are a lot of precious Roman objects there. So that was a strategy, and it is not only the British. In fact, if you go back little back, then that when Napoleon invaded Egypt, he had with him the historians also, and they had collected a huge amount of the these precious art objects from that region. And when he was defeated by the Britishers, the entire collection was taken to British Museum. So I think it is a crime to take anybody's or any country's heritage treasure to the other country and claiming that this is their own. This is a crime. They have no right over this. I think every country has a right to take them back, and they should really bring a lot of pressure on the British government, and like Greece and Egypt, and we also India should also do that. Particularly as far as India is concerned, they have the huge maybe Amravati pillars and beautiful decorated pillars and lintels. They have the South Indian bronzes. They have a lot of Buddhist images from Mathura and Gandhara, and also the Kohinoor is with them. Chhatrapati Shivaji's sword is with them. So there is a very important, and these are the without having these objects, we are not complete in fact, because if you want to really write history of the country, we need to consider these objects also. So I think it is important that we also exert a lot of pressure on British, on Britain, and try to get these precious objects, so that we will be able to at least it is wrong to say that India has no capacity to conserve them, preserve them. We have, in fact, archaeologists of India is very able. They are doing such an important work outside India, like Cambodia. So also our British Museum, our Indian Museum, like this National Museum, the Chhatrapati Shivaji Vastu Sangrahalaya in Mumbai, there was tremendous facility. So we are capable of preserving and protecting our heritage. So it is our right, in fact, to take them back, and we should really exert pressure on Britain and even other countries. Even France has taken a lot of objects from India. So I think it is our right to take them back.
Professor Nalapat, we did see a lot of camaraderie between Rishi Sunak and the Prime Minister in September at the G20. How difficult or easy would it be to navigate this sensitive space, considering that both of these, have this equation now? Is it going to be a deal breaker, or do you think it's going to be a deal facilitator?
Well, the fact is that India matters a lot is evident from the fact that the Prime Minister of India has made no secret of the fact that he would like to see many of these treasures back. Treasures associated with Shivaji Maharaj and various other treasures. At the same time, I don't believe anybody has cancelled an appointment with him. But having said that, it's a very important point raised by Dr. Shinde. That is, when a people gets denuded of its past glory, then that people, according to the colonial mindset, they become less willing or less able or less determined to fight back against colonial oppression. It was only after the whole country unified in a way, under the freedom movement, and of course the military played its own role in that very strongly by basically saying it's time that we were free after fighting 2 world wars on behalf of the Allies and doing exceptionally well. But the reality is, it was a systematic method of denuding any knowledge of the greatness of Indian culture. And may I say, Vineet, is not simply, statuary, is not simply jewelry, diamonds, and various other things. It's also in what we are taught. And if you look at the teaching for such a long time, decades and decades and decades after 1947, forget about before 1947, the Union Jack was fluttering atop Raisina Hill. Talk about after 1947. We still continue to read those kind of textbooks, for example, in which the ancient history of India, experts like Dr. Shinde, who have studied for so many years the thousands and thousands of years of Indian history. I mean, he would be the ideal individual to design courses on Indian history. And those courses should be mandatory in school in India. And over the years, more and more knowledge about the entire history of India. All 6,000 and odd years, much more, but I'm talking about a reasonable chunk of our history. Instead of which, what do we know? We know about the last 200 years, 300 years. We know a little bit about 600 years or maybe a little more than that. About the last, beyond that, we know almost nothing. It was considered myth. And that was the purpose of this denudation. You take away the treasures, and even the Greeks will then believe that they were nothing, they were no civilization. Fortunately, neither we in India nor the Greeks, we are aware of our civilization, we are proud of it, and of course, therefore, we would like to get our treasures back. But the reality is, Vineet, this was part of the colonial technique. And that part of the technique was to denude a people of their history. And I think it's important that all across the spectrum, whether it's in education institutions, whether it is in in movies and every other way, we have to communicate the reality of the entire history of India, and which history to which every Indian has claim to. Every Indian has got claim to it. In fact, the whole world has got a claim to it because Indian civilization is so universal. So that, I think, is a very important point raised by Dr. Shinde about denuding a people of their glorious past so that they will not have the will to fight the horrible present of colonial domination.
All right, almost out of time. Ambassador Mukherjee and Mr. Shinde, concluding thoughts from both of you, and then we wrap up.
I just wanted to add to what Professor Nalapat has eloquently articulated, that denuding a people of its culture, making them feel they are second-class citizens, laughing at their language, at their traditions, which go back millennia, is a classic colonial way of making people remain slaves and servants forever. Whether it's slavery or it's indentured labor, on which I've written my book, this is a classical colonial way of doing it. What they did in Greece was, when Greece was under the Ottoman Turks, and the Turks were never considered by the white colonizers as white or European. Had Greece been under the rule of Greeks, maybe the Earl of Elgin may have thought twice about what he did. This was also their racist approach to races that they considered to be inferior and therefore to be kept under subjugation. I would like to add that neo-colonial approach is still present in the minds of those who run the British Museum, in contrast to the Met, or in contrast to Australia. Australia has returned some objects to us, so have the Americans. But unfortunately, the British, be it Rishi Sunak or anyone else, they are still living in a colonial past which has long left them far behind, but they still think they can cling to their colonial past. I completely agree with Professor Shinde in what he said, that we must press hard, because indeed it was very insulting for me when I was ambassador there to be told by the director of the British Museum that my heritage, my Indian heritage, is safer in the British Museum than in the National Museum in Delhi, which is probably far, far superior than the British Museum is today. So it's really something that we need to put our foot down. There are French treasures, and let us not forget, Vineet, since you've traveled widely like me, that Cleopatra's Needle, which is proudly standing on the banks of the River Seine, was looted, unfortunately, by Napoleon, and still stands where it does. It's also a symbol of colonial rule. So Cleopatra's Needle, that's for the Egyptians to work out. But we have so much looted treasure in the British Museum, in the V&A, etc. We must not rest until we get back at least 50% of what they've taken. They can keep 50% because otherwise the museums will be empty, and we take the best, we get it back here.
Absolutely. Professor Shinde, quickly, sir.
Yeah, I agree with both of them. And let me tell you that when the Britishers came here, they realized that our culture is so strong and very robust. And they realized that if they continue to allow this teaching of Indian culture here, perhaps it will be difficult for them to rule this country. And therefore, Macaulay, in fact, intentionally made sure that our cultural history is not diminished, and it is not really taught properly in India, and that was a systematic efforts. And as a part of that, the best treasure of our culture was transported, looted by these people, and taken away to give the impression that your Indian culture is inferior to European or our culture. That was the main motive of this, and that was the whole thing. They did that, and they impose upon us, the British or the European or the Western education system, so that we forget our roots, and we are deprived our own culture. So that was a systematic effort made by them. But as both of them have said that we should get this our treasure back, and whatever efforts are required from maybe professionals, from maybe government, that needs to be done. We have a good facility in the country, and we are capable of taking care of our own heritage here. Thank you very much.
Well said, sir. We've run out of time. Ambassador Mukherjee, Professor Nalapat, and Mr. Shinde, appreciate you taking out the time and speaking with us.
For more such videos, subscribe to the NewsX YouTube channel, hit the bell icon.